Hey friends and everyone, welcome back to Netcode-Hub channel. Let's say you are done building your web API with .NET 9. How do we expose this API to the real world and help consumers by adding description, endpoint details, and also authentication to secure your endpoint? How do we do it? And that is what we're going to have a look in this video. So let's start everything as fresh so you can grab all the steps. Let's launch our Visual Studio 2022 or higher. Let's create a project, and in there we're going to select a .NET 9. That is what we're going to use for this demo. Once we have this project installed, we actually need two packages to assist us. Since we're going to be adding authentication, we need JWT Bearer application, the package. And aside from that, in order to visualize everything for us to see it well, we're going to be using the API interactive library known as the Scalar, which was meant for .NET 9. So let's get these two packages installed. So these are the two packages that we need. As indicated earlier on, we need the JWT Bearer, since we're going to integrate JWT Authentication in our web API. And also we need the Scalar, the ASP.NET Core. This package provides an interactive way of interacting with an API. Okay, so now that we have this, we go to Program, and we can go in and map our API. So after we are done with this, let's go to our properties folder. Then in the launch settings, we're going to make the startup point as the Scalar. So in there, we can have access to launch URL. And we're going to say this is Scalar. And first launch of view 1, version 1. And now with the launch browser, let's set it through so it can open browser as soon as we run this application. Okay, now when we go to the endpoint here, we have a default controller created, and that is a weather forecast controller. So all this, if you want to add documentation in .NET 8, we can add XML documentation. I think I've made a video on that, so I'll put in the video description if you want to add documentation to .NET 8 and below. By .NET 9, we can use API. We can use the description. We can also use a summary attribute to specify whatever information that we need for the user to be aware of. So how can we achieve this? So let's use this method. Now this method is going to get us weather forecast, isn't it? So we can use endpoint description and endpoint summary to give a clear definition and instruction to anybody who's going to consume this endpoint. Okay, so maybe we can use this, the endpoint description attribute. And now with the description, what can you say? Let's say this get us weather forecast. Okay, something like that. And we can also use, let me actually put the summary on top, because the summary comes before the description. So endpoint summary. And we can also use let's say this weather forecast. You can pass in anything at all that you want to be read as a description or as a summarized version of this endpoint. So you are summarizing what this endpoint was going to do, and here you are describing how it's going to do it. So here you can pass in any message at all to the user which is meaningful and it relates to the context of your endpoint. I hope you're getting that. Aside from that, in .NET 8 and below, we can also use a produce response type. So here, we can say that this produces the response type of, we can, you see from here, we have a default response type. We have a response type, but here we want to provide our own response type. And now here we're going to say that this produces of 200. So in case we have return, okay, it's 200. In case we have bad requests, you can have 400. You can have a lot of response types. So you can also pass it on here. You can repeat this and specify the number of responses that this endpoint can return. You can pass it on here. Okay. Now that we are done with this, when you run this application, let's see what's going to happen. So you can see that from our Scalar UI, you can see we are having this weather forecast. And in case I click on this weather forecast, you can see I have, there is a summary weather forecast over here. And now this gets as weather forecast. You see that? There is a responses. We have only one response that we specify. So that's a 200. That is an okay. You can add more. So that's the first way of adding description to your endpoint. What's going to do and maybe what it takes to it. You can add all this and add the response types that this can return so that the user or the consumer will be aware of what it's going to do. Okay, aside from that, when you check this, you can see we are having our API demo version. We are not having any something like the contact information. We don't have a customizable way of actually getting the user informed of what this API is about. Okay, so how do we do that? We can also do it by configuring the add OpenAPI endpoint or service in the program.cs file. Let's see how to work with that. So go to your program.cs file, and you can see from here we have this service being added, builder.services.add OpenAPI, and here we can specify some configuration in here to make sure we put in our contacts and information which is necessary to give much details to this endpoint or this whole API. So let's do it. So on the check here, you can see we are doing simple configuration. On the check, we are injecting our document, our context, and our cancellation token. Now in here, we want to specify our information in here. Also, we want to specify the contact details in case there's an issue, whom to contact, and that is what we need to specify here. Now you can see we are having a title, we are having version, and our description. And as you can see from the contact info, we're specifying this. So that is the simplest way of doing it. Now let's see. Let's make sure we check this out again, and that has been refreshed. Now let's check the details of this endpoint. Okay, it hasn't been reflected, so we need to restart this. Okay, so you can see from here we are having this weather forecast API, so you can give a real meaning or that is a sensible meaning to your weather forecast. And as you can see, you can also give a description to this endpoint, so consumer would know all what this API is going to do. Okay, so here we're going to summarize all the endpoint, the functions of this API, and I'll put it here as a description so that consumer can know the details of this endpoint. So you can see we have your 1.0.0 as version also specified. Okay. Now, if you want to look at how you can integrate API versioning, I think I've made a video on that already, and it's the same thing. So I'm not going to cover that in this, but I'll put a link in the description. So if you want to look at how you can add version to it, then you can also check it and implement it same as that. Quite simple. Okay. Now we have this. Let's look at something here. We're going to authorize this. Let's go to our API endpoint. Now in our endpoint with our controller, we have only one endpoint here. So let's also create another endpoint here. So we are having a simple endpoint, which returns two response types. 200, that is for OK, and a 400 for bad request. We're taking a number as a parameter, whereby the user pass on this number. In case that number is greater than 6, you want to return the status code of 200 with that number. In case it isn't, then we return 400 as a bad request with that number. But on the check, you could see this is authorized. It tells you that if you are not authorized, you cannot access this. But before this can work, we need to add the authorization scheme, authentication scheme. How do we do that? Let's go to program and add that. So in here, we're going to add it as a service. We can put it down here. So when you check here, you can see we have added our JWT service here. Now we need to go in and create our token, because before we can add this, we can add JWT token to our header, we need to create it. So let's quickly have a simple method which can help us create this JWT token. But before we do that, we need to go to our JSON settings.json, and in there we need to specify the section that we have created. So we need a main section of JWT. Then we have the key of audience. We're going to have the value, and we're going to have a key of key with a value, which is going to be a unique key or a private key, which we'll be using as a sign-in key. So in our app settings, let's have this done here. So that is what we're doing. As I told you earlier on, this session, we have a key and the value, key and our value, key and our value. So these are the things that we need to specify here. Okay, so now that we are done with this, let's go to our same controller, and in there, let's have one method to return a token, which should be free. This time around, this is not protected, so we can have access to it in the form of HTTP GET. Let's say get token, and after we have that, we can also specify the same documentation as we've done here. Let's use same. So this simple method will enable us to create our token. You can see from here we have a security key, which is going to we're going to get this from our JWT section with the key value that we specify in the app settings here. Aside from that, when you have a look at the next one, you want to create a credential, and this takes in the parameter of the security key with the algorithm that we want to use to encrypt this. We need to provide a claim, so we're having two claims here, and we have a token generated. We are not much focused on how we can generate this, okay? Here, we want to just generate something so we can use to build our API documentation. So if you want to look at how you can create JWT token, implementing all the stuff like validation and expire date and all stuff, I've made a video, and also I'll also put it in the description, so you can also check it from there. All right, so now that we have this, when you run this application, we're going to have, because since we have these claims hard-coded, it is going to get this work and return as a new token anytime that we create this. Let's have a look. So you can see from here that we have it opened, and this weather forecast and our get token. So if I click on this, I'm going to get token. But when you check here, this takes in a number. This is a private, and now with this, if I click on test this and I'll specify the number of, let's say 10, click on send, and I'm having 401. Now this tells me that I am unauthorized, right? 401 means unauthorized, so it means we need to provide a token before we can access this. And here we have authentication as optional, so we need to add this type here before we can do it. Remember that here we are using JWT, so the type here is going to be bearer, so we need to add it so we can have access to it. Now let's go to a token here, and I'll click on send. Let's get a token. So this is our token. Let's grab this, and now from the authentication, you know, we should add it as a header. So let's come here and I'll add this as authorization. And within that, we need to provide bearer first, then space, and I'll paste in our token. Once you have this, we can just right click, go to inspect element. From here, let's go to network tab, and let's make a send and check it out. So we click on this, then we want to send this, and here let's see the response that we're going to have. So what's the, okay, so this is get token. No, we're not talking about this get token. We want to focus on this private one with a value of 10. Now let me clear this again. Now let's hit on this. We're passing 10, but we still have 401. Check here, and here we need bearer as a token type. We have provided that, but you see it is not working. Let's check it again. So maybe this is our header, this is our header. So let's add a token again, authorization. Then let's add our bearer. Now let's go, since we have this added, let's go and make a send and check it out. So I click on this, send it. We still have 401, although we have provided valid JWT key. Check it out from here. We have the authorization, the type here, it accepts the authorization here, it is bearer, and we have our token here, but we still have 401. Do you know the reason why? Because we are missing something in. Check it out. From this authentication type, it is none. We need to configure it so we can have access to the bearer that we can choose from here. If you do not specify this or type, no matter the number of tries you're going to get, you're still going to have 401. So how do we do this? We can configure that from our program.ts file. So let's do it, and let's check this out again. So in the program.ts file, let's first create a class down here. Then we're going to use this class in our configuring the document transformer. We're also going to be using the same thing here. So when you look at this method, that is what's going to enable us make this work. We're going to create this Bearer security scheme transformer, and in here it takes in the interface of authentication scheme provider, and it inherits from the same interface of this OpenAPI document transformer. Since it's an interface, we need to implement it, and we have one method in it, default, and that is what we have implemented over here, transforms async. In that, you want to get all authentication scheme providers. In case you have Bearer token added, in case you have JWT, you can have, or you're going to get all the schemes. In that, you want to make sure if it is only the JWT bearer, that is where you want to make this work. So we want to check from here if the name corresponds with the default authentication scheme, which is of bearer. Then you want to do this. We create a requirement which should be in a dictionary form of a string as a key and an OpenAPI security scheme as a value. In that, there is a key that you want to provide. The same thing applies here. That is the scheme of bearer, and that is a value. So the value is we're creating new API security scheme. You want to specify the type, which is an HTTP, because you're going to be using to make an HTTP request. The scheme here is this scheme, that's a bearer, but this scheme should be in lowercase. So we have the scheme and we convert that to lower. We are doing this so we can skip typos. In case maybe you want to type in bearer yourself and get it wrong, then you can have an issue with it. But with this, it's hard for you to get an issue with that. Then where do you want to keep it? You want to keep it in any request header. Then the bearer format here is a JSON web token. After that, we create this component. In case it isn't null, then in case it is null, then want to initialize it. Then the security requirement that we have specified, you want to assign to the scheme of this. Now that we are done with this internal class, we need to add it as a transformer to this. You know, here, when we were configuring the details of an API, we added this document transformer, isn't it? So in order for us to integrate the same authentication in there, we need to do same. And now this time we're going to add this class name. So grab this class name from here. Then on top here, we're going to say options.add document transformer, and we're going to paste in the class name that we have. Meaning it's going to use the service that we have implemented in that to authenticate the API. All right, so now that we have this done, we need to go and run this, and now let's check this out. Okay, so from here, now when you check this, you can see it has authentication type and it takes in a bearer token, as you can see from this. Now we can provide a token in here. Now don't worry, let's go to get this or private, and I'll click on test it out. Now check it out. We see we have bearer added, and that's great. We are good. Now we can go in there and add our token in here, or we can decide to add this token here. Now let's go and generate a new token. So click on this, generate this token, and now send this, get a token, copy it. Now before we make this, let's call this private endpoint. We have 404. This should be 401. Let's pass in the number of, let's say, 20. Now make a send, and we have 401. So it tells you that that endpoint needs a token to work with it. Now let's paste in this one, and if you check this, we have the token over there. Let's actually go to inspect element, and in here from our network tab, we're now going to make an API call. Now check this out. So from here we still have 401. Let's click on this again. Okay, so it's saying that the token has no expiration here. So it means we need to add that. I wanted to skip that, but we need to add. So check from our forecast. You can see from here this expired. We can say this datetime dot add. We can just add a day or more. So let's rerun this. So let's go and get the token again from our get token request, send. We need to get a token, not this. This is a token, and now we have it. Grab that, go for private. Let's pass in send for an authorized 401. Let's paste our token here. Now go to network tab, and now you pass in 10 as the parameter. Click on send, and now check it out. You can see that from here we have the authorization as bearer, and this is our token. And now let's close and check it, the response. You see we have the number here. The response status code is of 200. That's an okay, and we have the number. We can pass in, let's say 2, and we're gonna see as bad request. That is of 2, and that's what we specified. So we can say in this simple way, we have been able to add an API description. We have been able to also add an endpoint description, and we have added authentication to secure your endpoint. And that is how it works with Scalar and any other API documentation library. All right, so that is it for this video. I hope you've learned something. If you know you did, then do not forget to like this, and that is a way that you can do to support this channel. Giving a like, it means so much to this channel, so I believe you're going to do that. Yes, I know you do that. All right, so I'm going to catch up again with the next informative content and interesting one as this. So stay tuned whilst you go over this and get the concept in it. Until then, take care and catch you up again.